Magic Goddess. I'm actually back today with another deck profile. Today I'll be doing my updated Witch Oracle Think Tank deck, Scarlet Witch to be more precise. So first off, let's go ahead and start with the starter. Of course, is Lulu, probably the best or one of the best starters in existence. It's pretty much a you could almost say plus. Yeah, it's a +1 on ride. Yeah. Comes out, Soul Blast 2, draw a card. So she is really good for that. And of course, that's the starter you're going to be running because it is a witch deck after all. So one of her. And then grade zeros, we're of course running 4 heal triggers. Just my random bunch there. It doesn't really matter which 4 you use. So I have like Lozenge and a random Circle Magus there. So then I run 4 birds, it's crit, 4 more crit, and yeah, just only 8 crits in this build, and I'll go over why in a little bit, and then 4 stand. Now this is the Witch stand. It's a GB1 Soul Blast 1. At the end of battle of this unit boost, you can pay the cost. If you do draw a card, return this to your deck, shuffle your deck. It's a pretty decent effect, but you're going to mainly use this because it's a Witch card. But, I mean, standing is decent too. I run 4 of the Unflipper, Perfect Guard. You mainly want to guard your Vanguard anyway, so guarding the Vanguard is not as important, and there's some counterblast that you can use in this deck. But that can switch if you want. It's not as important in this variant of the build, but so if you don't have that shield or you just want to use different shields, by all means. So, then I run the Strider. Ame no Habakiri. Or, no, Ame no Murakumo, actually. And it's not as good in a non-Susanoo deck, but you want to stride a lot. So, it has a 7k booster, so it's pretty useful there. Then I run 4 Lalas. Finally, she has a place in the deck. I don't really use her for the effect. She's just a 7k vanilla, but more importantly, she's a witch. So, that's why she's here. So far, count is about 8 witches, not counting Lulu. Onto grade, sorry, one more grade 1. I have the 10k attacker. This is mainly so I can be more offensive. It's a GB1 attacker. It's a 7k booster. This can be anything, 8k or the 15k shield. And for some builds, it might be better to be a 15k shield. But I went with this just because it's more offensive. And you can also make it omelet if you want. So, moving on to the grade 2s. I run 3 glaces with stands. Well, she's pretty much always going to be an 11k, so attacker. So with stands, it's pretty decent. And then in this variant of the build, you don't draw as much. So having attackers that don't need boosters is really good. So she's decent for that. And I found that she works better than the one we have excluded. So 4 diviners. He's decent now because you have the counterblast to use him. And basically when you boost GB1 counterblast, you can draw. Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward. But you'll use him with effect. And then of course the 12k attacker, again another attacker that you GB1 that you don't have to boost to hit numbers, or to hit with rather. Into my grade 3s, I run, of course, CoCo. She's a counterblast 1, placed in van or rear. There's no GB cost. If you have a Vanguard Witch, the number of cards in your soul is 1 or less, you can pay the cost. If you do, draw 2, choose a card from hand and discard. A less impressive version of CoCo, but she's an 11k, and you can use her on rear guard, so pretty decent in that aspect. And again, a witch. So I think that's about so far 12 witches. And then we have 4 CoCos. Obviously, she's really good for Counterblast 2. If you have 1 or less in soul, you can draw 2. So pretty much a break-even Counterblast. 13k attacker. The 10k bases kind of hurts you a little bit, but the draws can give you a boost. She makes 16 witches. So we're going to go into our strides now. I run one Kieran. Sometimes you'll use them as a first stride or some stride you can toss. So if it hits, you can look at the top two, or rather, yeah, search for the top two. Look, put one in the hand, put one at the bottom of the deck. It's just decent. I use one 9-headed Dragon King, and that's because he's a counterblast one at the end of the ability, or at the end of the battle. This unit attacks the Vanguard. You can put 3 cards from hand back to your deck and draw 3. Basically, if you get too many heals in hand or some triggers in hand, you can shuffle them back. There's not really much way of shuffling back in at least this build, so this is a way to do that, and it's been fairly useful sometimes. 2 Takemi Kazuchi. It's just there for the extra draw if you ever really need it. But since you can't use it as a first stride, I don't tend to use them a lot. And only when I'm really desperate. It could really be anything. I think that's probably the one these 2 you can get rid of if you want to switch for something else. Then, of course, I run 4 MiMis. So she is actually a really decent card. You can use her as a first stride. So when you stride, you discard a witch from hand. So that's why you have 16 witches here in this deck. And if you have a heart with witch in card name, you can pay the cost, which is that cost. And your opponent may choose 2 cards from hand and discard them. If he doesn't, or she doesn't, you can deal 1 damage. And all trigger effects are nullified for that damage. So if they're at 5 and they don't discard, they lose, essentially. It's been pretty good. You're going to probably stride this first, and it doesn't flip anything, so you can just keep striding this. So, yeah, she's really good, actually. But the problem is, because she forces you to run so many witches, you don't draw as much as the Susanoo variant of this build, which makes it so you can't draw out the game as much. You are a bit more offensive in a sense that you were going to be swinging with like the 11k attackers and whatnot. Hopefully you can do a stand, and you want to try to push them to about like 3 or 4 before your first stride. So hopefully you can get to that. And CoCo does really help if you fight like against grade 2 decks. Rush decks like Ripple or whatnot. So I can't guarantee that you'll do so well against Ripple. The draw does kind of help you catch up a little bit. So it's just thanks to the draw. Overall, it's a pretty decent build. I feel that the other build with Susanoo is a stronger build, in that you can drag out the game and it feels more like a control deck. But this build is more like full offensive, which I'm not a fan of Bushiroad, like kind of pushing all these stands and whatnot on us, because like with the witch stand here, if you don't want the witch stand, right, which this is probably the witch that you can exclude, or Lulu if you want, but the deck was actually weak without the stands, because even with the crits you don't get enough attacks in, and you don't draw enough cards to get full columns. So the stands will really help with your, like, because you all saw these 12Ks and 11Ks in here, they really help with that. But she is almost just fodder. I basically think of her as a strider. And you need these because you don't want to toss your grade 3s just for anything. So, I mean, your hand gets kind of clumped just because you can consider this a basically discard 2, your grade 3 and a witch 2 stride type of effect. So that's kind of the drawback there. So you're losing 2 cards to do 1 damage, essentially, to somebody. Instead of, losing 1 and gaining back 2 cards. So you only gain back 1 card from the drive check, essentially. So you're always going to be at a hand disadvantage unless you can pressure your opponent enough. But I still think it's a decent build. Hopefully, with the new Susanoo stuff coming out with set 5, I'm able to get a test and maybe get a stronger build. Maybe like a Susanoo CoCo again, or a Susanoo something. And I think that might be better than this. But if you want to play MiMi, I really love MiMi. She's a really good card. But I just don't think there's enough witch support. The deck does alright, but I don't think it'll hold very well in huge competitive play. But in the play testing, I mean, it's been kind of 50-50 against those really competitive decks like Ripple nowadays. So that was with my experience with the deck. But hopefully, if you guys want to try this deck, you maybe come up with your own versions of the build. But this is the one I've had the most success with. And yeah, so it's been Astro Imagine, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.